So this program or this project is completely self-directed. We have small groups for each person in the project. The idea is that you connect with that small group at least once a month, uh, and that we have a number of books. We have opportunities for service. We have a lot of things that you can be involved in. But again, all of that is voluntary as you have capacity and time. The idea is, and Pastor Gia will explain more about the 40 to 50 hours, but the idea is that over the course of this year, we have 40 to 50 contact hours that enables us to move a little further on the intercultural awareness spectrum. So with that, please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, or Pastor Gia will stop along the way for some questions. But I turn it over to Pastor Gia. Pastor Gia, thank you so much for joining us today and leading this session. We are so pleased to have you, and thank you for your time.
Oh, no problem. I've been looking forward to this. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for spending an hour of your glorious Saturday with me. I'm really excited that we are together this morning, and we're about to embark on an incredible journey. Thanks for making time. And thank you, Pastor Lawrence, for an incredible introduction. This has been a whirlwind of a season, as I know that it has been for you. And while there's so many different competing elements for our time and our energy, it seems like now is the right time for this type of conversation. And so you, Linden Hills, is one of 7 congregations that also feels that same sense of call and urgency to really devote our focus to the elements of the Action Project. Even though Pastor Lawrence gave an introduction, I'll continue to introduce myself throughout the time that we are together. I'll tell you a couple of things just first off about myself. In addition to being a pastor here at First Covenant Church in downtown Minneapolis, I have a background in education and in diversity training. I'm older than I look. I have been training for over 20 years and doing this type of work. And one of the things that I have found has been challenging about this work is that we spend a lot of our time learning and getting all the book smarts and getting ideas in our heads. But there seems to have been some challenges when we attempt to move what we're learning from our heads into our hearts. Sometimes people have a hard time understanding or learning how we take what we've learned and apply it into our daily lives. And that can be challenging. And so this is how and why the Action Project was birthed, is from the culmination of a long history of teaching and training and recognizing that sometimes there's a disconnect between what we're learning and how we're moving it into praxis. And so that's what we're doing. We're going to be learning over the course of the next year how to move what we're learning into praxis. And that's super exciting. Again, you join one of 7 congregations, and we're all going to kind of feel our way and move through the year. And so if it's all right with you, I'll tell you a couple things about my training style. I'm really appreciative that you have your mutes on, and that's great. I'm also an interactive trainer, which means that I am hoping that we'll have some dialogue together at some point. I'm hoping that there'll be an opportunity for you to offer any questions or thoughts that you have throughout the hour. So I want to make sure that I just reinforce what Pastor Lawrence says, is that, I want to hear from you. And that we're learning together. So feel free to put something in the chat, or when it comes time to discussion, feel free to take off your mute so we can talk together. Anytime I'm training, I come into a space and I tell people, I expect to learn from you, just like you're learning from me. So no pressure, but we're learning together. So let's get started. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen because I think it's really important as we are chatting. All right, can everybody see? If you cannot see the screen, everybody good? Okay. So this is our Action Project, and let's do a quick overview of what it all, of what it entails. If it will let me move. There we go. ACTION is actually an acronym for a commitment to inclusion in our neighborhoods. And again, this was launched after recognizing that there's a need for some journeying together and opportunities for people to take what they're learning and to move it swiftly into action. Sometimes we need that assistance, and that's what this year-long journey is. It is a year-long journey. We're going to start with the IDI, the Intercultural Development Inventory. We're going to take it actually in the next week or in the next few days. And then we'll take it again a year later. And so that second time we're taking it is kind of to gauge our growth. And what I love is all the goodness and the richness in between. I would say it is like the meat in a sandwich, but some of us may be like I'm eating on a plant-based diet these days, so I won't say meat. It's all the real good richness stuff in between. These two IDI pieces of bread, these bookends that I'm really interested and exciting about. That's where the learning and the growth and the community journeying will happen. So I'm going to just really, really quickly stop my screen because I want to make sure that I just want to know if anybody's taken the IDI already. Has anybody ever taken the IDI before? All right, so there's 3 of you who have taken it already. So then bear with me for throughout a couple of our segments today as we're kind of recapping what that IDI is. But for the rest of us, let's talk about it. The IDI is, an online assessment. It's not standardized. It is an online assessment of about 50 to 60 questions that help us to understand the landscape of how we as individuals and as your collective at Linden Hills view the world along this intercultural awareness spectrum, as Pastor Lawrence shared. And so we'll be taking it, each congregation is taking it now, so we'll be taking it in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll take it again exactly a year later. Okay, and we'll learn more. So I'm going to go back and share my screen here. And let's talk about why we need this. So I love this picture of these glasses, these frames, and all that comes inside of it. When we're talking about the word culture, I often use this phrase, a buzzword. There's some words that are in our own repertoire that we use that we may use so much that they kind of, you can imagine like screwing in a nail or a screw. Sometimes it's just kind of, you kind of end up stripping it because you use it so much. And I think sometimes culture is one of those buzzwords where we use it so much, where we kind of assume that we all have the same understanding and definition of what culture is. And I think that there's a challenge with that in there being some misconstrued understandings and some miscommunications. So let's talk about when we're talking about intercultural awareness and what culture is. Let's get it out of the buzzword frame and let's put it into context. These glasses provide a really great understanding of that. Most times when we think about culture, we think about people who maybe people of color, or we think about a particular nationality, and it is those things, excuse me, and it's also a whole bunch more. When you look inside of these lenses, we'll see that these are just some of literally hundreds of different aspects of who we each are, that contribute to our own culture and how we view the world. So you'll see there's religion on here, there's economic status, you'll see there's hometown, right? I mean, some of us who are from Minnesota will definitely say that there's a different culture here in Minnesota than it might be, let's say, on the West Coast or the East Coast, right? And so I have family. I'm from the East Coast, and so sometimes people will notice that I'm a little more direct, or some of my words may be a little sharper than others, and and they'll say, "Oh, you're from the East Coast. That's right," which is so funny. So even where we come from, our military experience, our peers, what our first language is, these are just some of the contributing factors to what makes up our own culture and our understanding of culture. And that's really important because oftentimes we assume, like I said, that we all have the same definition and that we all view the world the same. And that just isn't so. So looking at these glasses, there are some things when we're looking at some of these examples that we could see right off the top. Like you could probably tell by just by looking at me, for example, you could tell that I am a person of color. So when I'm looking at right here, I've got my cursor hovered over race. Some of the things that we can tell about culture are things we can see at face value. You could probably tell a little bit about my race. You might have an idea about my age and about my gender. You might, right? You might have some sort of, depending on where you see me, if you see me outside biking, you might have an idea about some hobbies that I enjoy or something like that. Those are things that we can see at face value. But culture is more than just what we see at face value. There's so many other layers and complexities to who we are that we need to be mindful and make room for the fact that there are other aspects and dimensions as well. So let's take a look at, I'm going to stop my screen. And this is a time when you get to unmute yourself. I wonder, if we're talking about culture, what are 3 things that you can think of right now that you would know about me just by looking at me? What might be 3 things that you would know about me just by looking at me?
Whether, what kind of disabilities you might have.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. Someone else.
What your occupation is.
Yeah, you would have no idea what my occupation is at all. Good, good. Unless I was wearing a signifier, like a collar or a stole or something. Okay, good. Amanda, you were going to say something too.
I was going to say, you probably like to read. You have a lot of books behind you.
Or it could be one of those fancy backgrounds that Pastor Lawrence has. And and those may not be actual books. They are actual books, though. You're absolutely right. So those are 3 things. Let me tell you some other things. You wouldn't know just by looking at me that one of my favorite genres of music is 80s rock and roll. You would have no idea. And that's true. You would never know that one of my favorite foods is pho, which is a Vietnamese soup, which I adore. You would have no idea that that I'm lesbian, that I'm married to a beautiful woman, and I'm a mom. I have 5 kids as well. These are things that you would not know. And the reason why I bring these up, these specific things that I bring up, is because a lot of times, let's look at like the 80s rock and roll. There are certain types of qualifiers that our society kind of attaches to people who might like 80s rock and roll. There are certain types of qualifiers that our community associates with people who enjoy pho, that Vietnamese soup, right? And certainly growing up, I never would have assumed that someone who was lesbian would look like me. There were so many other qualifiers and indicators of what someone who was a member of the queer community, what I expected them to look and sound and act like all the time. And whether we know it or not, these are all aspects which contribute to the tapes that play in our head, even if we don't want them to play. They all contribute to our perspective of how we view and see the world around us. There's really, this is a given. Every single person has biases and judgments and tapes that are playing in their heads. Every single person does. What's important is, are we aware of them? Once we know that they're there and we recognize them, we can work on shifting those narratives, right? But for right now, I happen to be someone who is out of the loop with 80s, with rock and roll and pho. I'm someone who's out of the loop with those things, right? So let's dig a little bit deeper, and let's talk about this notion of culture. A working definition of culture. This is one that I found, which kind of was kind of like a cold splash of water in the face when I saw this definition, but I think it's one that bears discussing over the course of the year. This description of culture comes from the Institute for Democratic Renewal and Project Change. Excuse me, it's an anti-racism initiative. And it says a social system of meaning and custom that is developed by a group of people to assure its adaptation and survival. I'm going to pause. I'm going to go back. We're thinking about we're thinking about how culture gets developed and why culture is taking shape. and who's defining culture, who actually is setting the tone for what culture looks like in our environment. We're looking right now, it's a social system of meaning and custom that is developed by a group of people to assure its adaptation and survival. These groups are distinguished by a set of unspoken rules that shape values and beliefs and habits, patterns of thinking, behaviors, and styles of communication. So I would even go so far as to say, unspoken and spoken rules, right? There are certain ideas about how people move about in the world and in our community that others that those in power happen to shape and decide. And those are the guiding forces of how we understand culture and the world around us. This is what I tend to push back on. I really like this definition much better. This is my hoped for, my pie in the sky hope for culture, is understanding that culture is an experience. It's not something to attain. It's not something to arrive to. It's an ongoing experience where we can witness a parade of episodes of activities. And if we fail to make something out of them, if we wait until they've all occurred before we attempt to reconstrue them, then we gain little in the way of experience from having been around when they happened. So it's not what happens around you that makes you experienced. It's the successive construing and reconstruing of what happens as it happens that enriches the experiences of your life. So culture experiences enriches our life. Culture experiences enriches the experiences of our lives, and it helps us, our participation in reshaping and reigniting and re-exploring is a part of the cultural experience. What I hope for is that we as a people can figure out how to do life together. That's what I'm hopeful for. And my favorite word out of this entire sentence is the word do. Where we are active, where this is a verb, we are putting one foot in front of the other, and we are not complacent, we are not complicit, but we are actually moving to do life together. And doing that means that everyone is coming together to the table to roll up sleeves and to engage in this culture as experience. Remember, though, that when I said before that some things we see about culture are face value, and there are other aspects which tend to be below the surface, which we talked about. I remember seeing this image of an iceberg when I was in middle school, and first of all, I was shocked that there was an iceberg extended below the water surface. I remember my mind being blown away by that. But now in a lot of diversity trainings, we see this same image as we're talking about different types of culture, the differences between objective culture and subjective culture, as we're talking about all the different complexities and layers that we each have that make up who we are. At face value, we're seeing things like language and food and dance, and these are surface types of elements of who we are. When we understand why we are who we are and how we came to be, we've got to go beneath the surface. We've got to go beneath the surface to understand our whys, our stories, and how we got here, how we make decisions, why we think the way that we do, who do we gravitate toward, what makes up our value system. These are all really open-ended, expansive questions that encourage us to have to go deeper. And so you look here, there's social expectations, there's behaviors, there's values, there's perceptions. All of this is a part of culture. And we're thinking about the term intercultural, right? And we're thinking about all the different elements that make up who we are. We can trail back to, not just decisions that we make about our own values, but those that have been embedded and ingrained in us by our grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents. Like DNA, some of the same threads of culture are following us for generations and generations and generations. And they contribute to the way that we see the world. These are some of the images that I found that I loved, is that, Our cultural stories affect what we see, what we think, what we do, and what we feel, even in ways that we're not always aware of, right? In the African American community, there's going to the hair salon and going to the barber shop is a huge staple of community. Not because there's anything particularly fantastic that happens inside of happens at a barber shop. It's the sense of community. It's the sharing of ideas and experience that creates this kind of inner workings of this community, which is so powerful. And there are other things too. There's people who are walking, and you'll see some of these elements of who we are. They contribute to how we see the world, and other people contribute to how we see the world. So when we're thinking about the barbershop, for example, it's not just the person that's coming to get their hair cut. It's also the people who are chatting and the people that are in the space that all contribute to the way that we understand the world. And so we oftentimes can't control that. We oftentimes are not even aware that there are other entry points like media or family or other people that help to shape our narrative and how we understand the world. So I know I'm moving kind of fast, at least I feel like I do, but that's just because I'm passionate about this. So I want to stop before we break into culture and just stop sharing really quickly and see if there's any questions that anyone has so far. We're good? Good. I'm so glad. All right, I'm going to keep on going. So when we're talking about culture, I think it's important for us to understand that that our understanding, here's that word again, that screw that we keep on turning, that stripping, where we're kind of overusing this word of culture and assuming everyone has the same understanding. And so I want to break these into two different subsets. One is a monocultural environment and one is an intercultural environment. And without telling you exactly the exact definitions, let's go through some examples so we can talk about them. Let me turn, there we go. So in a monocultural environment, an individual makes sense of cultural differences and commonalities based on one's own cultural values and practices. Versus in an intercultural environment, someone makes sense of cultural differences and commonalities based on one's own and other cultures' values and practices. You see the difference? So one is just the way that we see the world, and this is how everyone sees the world. We're assuming and expecting everyone to see the world that we do. Here's another one that says, I see the world this way, and I'm also making room for the fact that others are also experiencing the world and potentially experiencing it in a different way. In a monocultural environment, one may use broad stereotypes to identify cultural difference, versus in an intercultural environment, one uses cultural generalizations to recognize cultural difference. Broad stereotypes, if we know that the definition of stereotypes, these are most oftentimes not factually based ideas, myths, perceptions about a particular person, versus cultural generalizations are factual based generalizations of a particular group or a culture of people. Maybe it's about hair type or skin color or elasticity of skin, things like that. So a big distinction between the two. In a monocultural environment, we are led to less complex perceptions and experiences of cultural difference and commonality. So we are literally just expecting in a monocultural environment that everyone is super simple and they're above the surface line of that iceberg. We're just kind of assuming that's where we are. Whereas in an intercultural environment, we actually are expecting that there's more complex perceptions and experiences of cultural difference and commonality. We're looking for those other layers. We know that they're there, and we're searching for those. So those are the two differences here. And I'm going to pause right now because I'm wondering, given what we're talking about, the distinctions between monocultural and intercultural awareness right now, given what's happening in our in ministry and in the church, why is it important that we have intercultural awareness? why is it important that we're doing this work and making a distinction between monocultural and intercultural this year?
Well, it would seem to me that mono would ultimately end in be a dead end.
Mm. A dead end. Say more about that, please.
Well, my momentary thought just is that eventually there's nothing else to do.
Okay, that's it. We've done it. We've reached it. We've tackled it. We've achieved it. We're done.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I also think it's important because the monoculture and also happens to be the dominant culture that holds most of the wealth and most of the property and most of the advantages. And so it's important I think the importance of the intercultural lens is that if you only look at the way the dominant culture is, and that's the group that has the power, then you wind up with really unequal systems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One thought I had too is I'm just thinking of like monoculture in terms of agriculture, right? And we see that as like, maybe it feeds a lot of people, but it's like bad for the overall health of the environment quite often. And I think that metaphor is apt here as well.
I agree. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm sorry. Who was going to say something? I didn't want to interrupt. Okay. I love that metaphor. I think it's beautiful and really rich and appropriate. I'm also thinking about the fact that we are, this is ministry. And I'm thinking about how important intercultural awareness is, how important it is that, for us to have an intercultural perspective as we are providing outreach, as we are connecting with community, as we are connecting with each other. The types of connections that we have, the types of conversations and relationships that we're building are based upon our understanding of the world. And so if we are only connecting with people on a surface level, then our ministry and our outreach and our relationships will only be surface level. There's never a possibility for us to go deeper and to do the work that we are called to do as we're going and making disciples and being the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. It's not possible for us to do that if we're not willing to go beneath the surface. So I think that's an important distinction that I am excited to introduce with the Action Project, is because I think sometimes that's where the disconnect happens, is that we kind of get stuck in this rut, this familiar groove, right? Of staying where we are of our perspective. And then we have challenges, we meaning all of us, right? Of understanding how it is, why it is that we're not able to go deeper and do more with our building of community and relationships. And I believe that this is a large contributing factor, that we're not making room for the other experiences and viewpoints of people different than us in the world. And so because of that, we're always going to be hindered. And not just in the church. I'm going to share my screen again. So this was part of the IDI, some of their slides, which I thought was really powerful. Cross-cultural competency, intercultural awareness is also another term for cross-cultural competency, is ranked number 4 of the top 10 work skills needed for future, and not just in a corporate environment, in a nonprofit environment, in an education environment. Having the skills and having an intercultural awareness is key. We're thinking about all the types of connections and dealings, all the exchanges that we're having. If you're thinking about how important it would be for, and in a school structure, my oldest daughter is a middle school teacher. I can only imagine how the challenges that she would have and her students would have if she wasn't making intercultural awareness a priority in her teaching models and in her structures, right? And so we can replace school with any other environment. And I think we would land in the same space, that it is just imperative that we widen our understanding of relationships and people as well. And the IDI helps with that. There we go. The IDI is an assessment, as I said, it assesses intercultural competence along an intercultural development continuum. And I'm intentionally not going to speak too much about the components of the IDI because I want for you to be able to walk in and take that assessment on your own without any influence or contributing factors from me. But it is an assessment tool. It is holistic. It assesses mind and action sets. It is developmental and it is interculturally grounded. So it explains how individuals and or groups experience cultural differences and commonalities. I love this last sentence, that it explains how individuals and groups experience cultural differences and commonalities, because I think sometimes when we hear the word assessment, automatically we think standardized testing, we think right versus wrong. This is not a shaming or a blaming type of an assessment at all. I think for us as individuals, as Christians, as believers, as people that are residing with billions of other people on this planet, it's important for us to understand how we view the world so that we can learn how to work, how to live, and how to work together. So the IDI is cross-culturally validated. It's an assessment of intercultural competence. It's a 50-item questionnaire that has been translated now into 19 languages, and it's all online. It is customized. People can take individual IDI assessments. They can take groups or organization-wide. Your group here at Linden Hills will be taking a group assessment, which means you will each individually take the IDI, and then I will pull the reports as a composite, like as a collective, so we can get an average understanding of the landscape that is in your group. It is now cross-culturally validated with over 20,000 individuals. And there's no cultural bias. They found none at all, and it's not transparent. No social desirability, which means I can look at a question and it doesn't say, sometimes we want to pick the answer that makes us look what we think would make us look better or make us look more open. But trust me when I say that there's none of that transparent and none of that bias, that there's no way to engage social desirability in this assessment at all. We've tried just as experimenting. So what can you expect? We'll gain insights and concerning intercultural challenges that we face. We'll clarify intercultural goals that are important to us. We'll identify and engage in targeted developmental learning throughout the action project that will increase our intercultural competence in bridging across diverse communities. Some of the questions that we see come up are, is it accurate? It is. Is it predictive of results? It is. Who does it apply to? It applies to across a wide variety of cultural groups. And again, they have found no cultural bias. So I'm thinking about the current climate, and I'm going to stop my sharing again really quickly. I'm thinking about the climate of what's happening. First Covenant Church is here in Minneapolis. In addition to you, the other 5 congregations are also in Minneapolis. And I'm thinking about the current climate of what's happening in our community right now. We're still reeling after the unjust killing of George Floyd. There are still uprisings and protests that are happening. The election is just less than 3 weeks away. Thinking about the current climate, and I just want to take a moment to pause and consider, given that climate, why this work is important in our community. So not just in ministry, but just why this conversation matters to you, why you think it matters, given the climate that we're living in.
I guess one thing when I think about Minneapolis, it's one of the most segregated cities in the country, and so I think so I think right now we're kind of on this monocultural path right now, and I think and that is partly what led to the unjust killing of George Floyd, and other issues that we have. So I think it's kind of come to a head right now, and so that's why I think it's this time in particular seems appropriate.
Indeed. Thank you. Carol, I saw you speaking just a couple of moments ago.
I think the time is ripe for me. I've lived here close to 30 years, and this is a story of my experience here and in this country. And I live it every day. And this will give me the opportunity to speak about what my family and I go through on a day-to-day basis. And finally, we'll be listened to. I experienced the gaps in black and white in housing, education, and employment. And this is a long time coming. And I pray and I hope that this will be used for the greater good, because the trajectory and society as it is today, we got to make some changes. We got to make some changes for the good. We've got to pass the baton to our kids. And this is my life and I live it. And it's hard to love that oppresses you. It's hard to love everybody. And if I said I did, I'd be lying, Pastor Jia. And that's my struggle.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
We are holding this with you. We're holding your heart and your broken heart with you and your hopeful heart with you. I want to pause and just name that that your voice matters and your pain and your heart. It matters. And we're carrying that hope with you. You know, you're not alone. There's so many people who are there's so many people who are people of color, people who live on the margins, who are thinking that this action project, this journey may not be for them. There's so many misconceptions about what this is for, that this action project might be geared toward, sharing our own experiences, for some to share experiences and for others to learn and to listen. But I just want to pause and just name that exactly what Carol named and the feelings that she shared, so many people share. Together, I think it's these spaces, these intentional spaces for us to be able to be vulnerable and to be honest and to build relationship. You know, when you I believe that when you care about someone, you come to care about what they care about. And that's one of those hinges. And we talked about getting below the surface. You come to care about what they care about. And then that's a shift between being complicit and becoming an ally, and standing in solidarity, is building relationships so that their emotions, their broken heart, their experiences directly affects yours. So all are liberated together. And so I want to just name and thank you, Carol, for sharing your heart and your journey. And I remain hopeful with you. I think that we all are excited to see who we're going to be on the other side. I'm so excited to see who we're going to be on the other side of this. Does anybody have any thoughts or anything they'd like to say in response to Carol's sharing as well?
Pastor Gia, I just wanted to say, in terms of my reflection on why this is important at this particular point in our history and our reality in Minneapolis and St. Paul especially, is because we are, from everything that I see statistically, we're at a point where culturally the demographics of our country is shifting. And in 25 years, my hope is that all of us who are still around at that time can have uh, the ability to do life with one another, as you said in the beginning. Uh, the result of redlining has isolated most of our communities, and we now don't know how to live together. And I hope that this helps us do that.
Yeah. There's a lot of pain, you know, and I will be honest with you. Here's a this is why I'm so glad we have these info sessions. We have this time to talk, is because I think it's so important. The reality is that this isn't going to be an easy journey. The reality is that, you know, we're going to learn some hard stuff over the year. We're gonna learn a lot about how we got here, and what landed here. We're gonna have to wrestle with some really hard, with some hard information, and we're gonna have to wrestle with that. And I believe that together, we'll be stronger on the other side for that. But it isn't gonna be easy. So let's talk about what the journey is gonna look like. Let's talk about that. So I told you before that we are taking the IDI in a few days. In the next few days after this info session, I'm going to send you an email. It's going to come directly from my email. So it's not an auto, like I'm not a bot. I'm going to send it to you. And it's going to have your own personalized codes for the IDI. So you'll get them. They're only for you. So even if you have a spouse who's also signing up, you have your own individual codes. So you're going to take the assessment. And I'm going to pull those reports, and we're going to have another feedback session on November 7th, where we're going to go over the results. The results are going to be a collective, kind of like a composite of all of your group that have taken the IDI. So it's kind of like an average. If you're interested in knowing where you are individually, you can send me an email and we can set up a time for an individual feedback session. I can't give you your individual results ethically without sitting down and going over them with you. But if you'd like those, you can send me, you can reply to my email and we'll set up a time to go over those. That's an extra cost. It's $75 for the hour to go through those. But I think it's important and it's worthwhile. And I don't want for that to be a hindrance if you'd like to know where you are on this scale. So we'll have the feedback session after with the results. And then we're going to move right into, okay. And then we're going to move right into the feedback session. So monthly action. So I told you there are 7 congregations that are a part of this action project. So there's First Covenant Church, there's U Linden Hills, there's Solomon's Porch, there's Hennepin Avenue United Methodist Church. There is Holy Trinity Lutheran Church, ELCA. I always forget a couple when I'm reading these off. And there's St. Mark's Episcopal. So there are 7 congregations that are participating. About 225 people are participating in the Action Project. Every 4th Monday from 7 to 9, we're going to come together. And I'll show you an image in a second. I'm just talking to you so I can see your faces right now. So we're going to come together every 4th Monday for what I'm calling community action. So this is the communities coming together. It'll be virtual. I'll probably have a Zoom link, and we'll all come on together from 7 to 9. From 7 to 8:30, we'll have workshop and some education pieces. And then for 30 minutes, we'll do kind of random groups where you'll be broken out into random groups for some guided prompts and conversation. I'm breaking the 12 groups, the 12 months in between that kind of meet in between or plant-based in between into 3 different sections. So the first section is all about history. How in the world did we get here? How did we land here? The second piece is going to be all about life and faith through the lenses of people who are living on the margins. And then the third section, the third 4 months, is all about solidarity as defined by people who are living on the margins. Solidarity is another one of those buzzwords like culture, where we kind of overuse it and we may not, and we all may have different definitions of what it means to truly be an ally of someone who is on the margins. And if we want to stand in solidarity with someone else, we've got to know what it means to them so that we know how to show up for them fully. I've got 4 to 6 local educators who are historians, they are educators, they are advocates who and activists who are going to be alongside us for the journey, who are going to be guiding those monthly community action events. They're going to be teaching us how we got here. Someone from an African-American lens, someone from an Indigenous lens, someone from a Latinx lens, someone from an Asian American Pacific Islander lens, who'll be guiding us throughout our time. And so we'll be following them, and we'll be learning together, specifically how we got here, what does life and faith mean, and solidarity through the eyes of people living on the margins. Even though we're looking at just these 4 groups for the large community action events. As we whittle down, let me just say that I want to circle back to this notion that people living on the margins, you know, I had someone say to me, well, if we're already living on the margins, why do we need the action project? And I'd say, there's so many people living on the margins. There's so many people that we need to get to know, that we need to lean into more. People living with disabilities, right? People who are elderly, our young people are also considered marginalized. There's so much for us to learn about ourselves and about each other, that this is a whirlwind of experience and education for all who are involved. There have been some people of color who have asked for a separate group just to be able to have a space to process. And that's also in the process of being created. Everybody in the next few weeks is going to be assigned a buddy. So you'll have somebody that is from a different faith community that you can check in with. Maybe you decide that you want to send text messages every Friday or do a virtual chat once a month, whatever you want to do. This project is not just solely about connecting with people and learning about people living on the margins. Community is about learning about each other and building relationships as well. Every single church that is a part of the Action Project is from a different denominational background. So now we're getting outside of all the things ELCA, Episcopal, UCC, this is such an amazing opportunity for us to connect and engage with other people, and to find both commonalities while we're celebrating and understanding our differences as well. And so you'll have that. There'll be invitations that Pastor Lawrence will share with you, invitations that will have things like videos and podcasts. There'll be interviews. There'll be self-discovery invitations. I give one of these examples because you may see this come across your email, where I will tell people there's an article that really opened my eyes to help me understand how society is constructed to exclude people who are living with disabilities. We're thinking about, ramps and doors that may not be ADA accessible. How many people have challenges in getting inside spaces and accessing the things that they need? One of the activities that I may give would be to send you to a grocery store and to walk through your grocery store. And just to take a look at how, food and the environment is constructed, who it's constructed for, and who doesn't have access to the things that they need based upon how the environment is set up. I may challenge you to look at your television screens and watch TV for an hour and then journal about what are you learning? What does society tell you, those entry points about acceptable relationships and acceptable professions, and family models? What are some of the messages that we're learning? So you see, this extends so much well beyond. It extends well beyond, color of skin or ethnic background. We're talking about, ways where these tapes that I talked about in the beginning are playing in our head. This is how they get here. Is all these entry points from people and places and media and family and generational ideas and stereotypes that contribute to the distance that we have from each other. And so in order for us to shorten that distance, we have to identify it. We have to become aware of it. And so we've got that. So you'll have a buddy. I'll encourage you to write in a journal. Pastor Lawrence will send invitations to you weekly so that you've got some things that you can be doing, or monthly. And And you'll also have the community action, which will be that monthly fourth Monday where you're coming together. So I'm going to share this screen. This is exactly what I just shared with you here. And this is what's next. So you'll have your IDI. If you'd like to do an individual feedback session, you can let me know. You'll have a group feedback session. And then our action begins on the fourth Monday, which is November 23rd from 7 to 9 p.m. And I specifically didn't, and just if you're interested, let's see if I can pull this up so you can see this. You can't see I'm trying to get rid of my bar so that you can see what I was looking at. There we go. This is kind of that table, which kind of breaks down these community action pieces. You'll see we'll take the IDI here, and we'll have the first 4 months, which goes through history. And then we'll have life and faith. Then we'll have solidarity. And then we'll take the IDI at the end. And Pastor Lawrence has this image, and I'm sure that he'll be referring to this throughout. He's got a lot more information to be able to share with you about each of these pieces. And so we do have, and so we are, I'm really excited that Jim Bear Jacobs has agreed to the task of guiding us through the Indigenous lens with his team. And that Reverend Dwayne Davis and Valerie McClure will be, Valerie McClure is a Minnesota civil rights icon who has been here and who has been fighting for civil rights in Minneapolis for decades. She is a fantastic storyteller. And I am really excited about the videos and the interviews, the stories that she'll share with us about the African-American experience in Minnesota. She has lived has lived through so many different seasons and generations that I think that we're just gonna, I just can't wait to sit next to her and just listen and share her stories with you. So that's what's on the horizon. We've got a lot happening. It's exciting. It's a little scary, right? But it's exciting. And I'm really happy that so many people are finding, given the current climate, given our call to ministry, that there are so many people who feel led to participate on this type of a journey. When people say, oh, it's a, action, that's a year-long deal. It is. That is a commitment. It is a year-long commitment. And I lean into what Carol shared, is that people who are living on the margins, and we all, know people or ourselves maybe living on the margins, we can't set that down. That's a daily, everyday, putting it on dress that we're wearing. And so the least we can do in learning to stand in solidarity is to commit to a year of doing some of the same. And so we're going to do it. And it's going to be great and hard. Questions that you have for me?
While people are perhaps forming questions, I just want to make a note and say that I miscommunicated the time for the session on November 7th. It is at, and Pastor Jia, correct me, 2 p.m.?
Yep, it's from 2 to 4.
2 p.m., not 10 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name's Dave. I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to maybe some of the work that comes later and some of the relationship building that will come later. I'll share that I'm maybe struggling a little bit to make a commitment because it feels kind of very like mainline church, like let's sit around and drink tea and talk about stuff. And I'm much more prone to kind of direct action, and as is my good friend Catherine on the call. So what would you kind of paint toward the future? And like, I am very interested in building relationships across communities that I don't have relationships today. So what would you maybe paint as some of the benefits in committing to this?
I think that's a great question. So one of the things that we're adding, and that Pastor Lawrence will extend to you, different churches have different things, different ministries that are already happening in their spaces. So just like right now, some of you have book clubs or you have other ministries as well. There are some congregations that have other things happening. And so if you can imagine Action being kind of like a menu, there'll be a menu of invitations that people will be able to choose from. So one of them is having a buddy from a different combination, from a different congregation to chat with. One of them is journaling. One of them is also these invitations of these activities and theme-related podcasts. Some of the stories that we talked about, you'll have some information to read and chew on your own. And then there's a piece which is actually my favorite piece, and this is the organizational piece. So in ministry, we tend to gravitate more toward transactional ministries. If there's a need in our community, if we know that there are people, for example, I don't know about you, but yesterday I was helping to build greenhouses, a greenhouse at George Floyd Square, and I saw the biggest snowflakes I think I'd ever seen in my life. They were like the size of my hand, and I'm out there, and we're building. And I'm finding that it's so much more than building a greenhouse. There's people that are talking, they're sharing their stories, they're teaching how to use a drill. I'm not very handy, so I'm learning how to use the pre-drill stuff. There's people that are telling about, where they were when George Floyd was killed. There's this harmony. I'm just painting this picture for you. There's a woman who's a baker who brought fresh out of the oven donuts for people to thank them for building these greenhouses. I mean, all these beautiful things made up this ministry experience, which wouldn't be possible if I was just handing over, some gloves or a hat to somebody else. I believe that this is part of that whole building of relationships, so that when we care about people, we care about what they care about. And so I am intentionally working to shift the focus away from transactional ministry and invite people into spaces where they can actually go deeper. So there are four grassroots initiatives that are happening locally that I'm going to be extending to congregations to go deeper with. One of them is one that Pastor Lawrence and I have talked about often, which is Trust, as an organization that does a lot of work in the community called Trust. There's also an initiative that's happening right now here at First Covenant Church. My wife was a site manager for a distribution center that was at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church, right in the wake of the uprising. They served 800 to 1,500 people every service day, and made the difficult decision in August to end their ministry, to close that chapter. And my wife continued that here. And so even as we speak right now, people are coming in. And this is, if you can imagine, 100 people coming in, and them not just coming to get their non-perishable items, but literally creating time for conversation and for chatting and for, she calls the ministry Our Village Reunion. So it's our village and it's like a family reunion. There's music playing downstairs, there's toys, there's discussion, there's getting to know people. And then we're building, there's intentional space for building. And so each congregation will have an opportunity to connect with another one of those initiatives, so they can wrap their arms around them, so they can spend time and go deeper and connect with people in new and different ways than what they may not have had the opportunity to do so before. So you'll have your journal and your buddy. You'll have your own inner work stuff, right? Which is your reading and your articles. You'll have podcasts. You'll have this whole organizational piece where you're connecting with people that you normally may not ever intersect with in other ways, right? In an ongoing way. And you'll also have this congregational opportunity for you to connect with other congregations that you also may not otherwise intersect with in other platforms. Yes. Oh, I think you're muted, Catherine.
There, I just wanted to add to you, I think everybody else on here knows, I am actually the trust representative for
Ooh.
Linden Hills. I've been on the board for many, many years and been involved with trust. So
Wonderful.
gearing up for the auction right now. Yeah, just wanted to put that out there.
Great.
So, yeah.
Great. Looking forward to working with you. I think that there's,
Let's see.
the more that I hear about trust, the more amazed I am about the work and the expansiveness of their ministry.
Thank you. Yeah, thank
Mhm.
you.
Mhm. Other questions that anyone has? I'll tell you, I keep using the reference menu because I think it's so important. If you're going to a restaurant, if you can imagine going to the Cheesecake Factory, there's like pages and pages and pages of options of what you can eat, right? And you get to decide if you get to decide, are you going to lean in and have the amazing avocado egg rolls? As you can tell, those are my favorite. Are you going to lean in and have the amazing avocado egg roll and the theme related podcasts? Are you
Oh, girl.
right? I mean, are you going to do that? Are you going to lean in? Are you going to lean in and have an amazing piece of cheesecake and do the organization and the other pieces, right? You get to pick and choose what you'd like to do and how involved you'd like to be. If you, and knowing that you're taking the IDI again in a year, you're honestly going to get out what you put in. And so if you're wanting to get involved, if you're wanting to learn more and you're hungry for that, then dive in and connect with an organization that we provide, and really make the most of journeying with other people who you may not otherwise ever meet if it wasn't for this. We're working on creating a Facebook group for participants of the Action Project. And that's just another way for people to share their stories and experiences and their events. It's a variety of opportunities for people to be able to jump in as they see fit. But if you find that you are a salad eater and you want to eat one time a day and if you're not putting in as much in as you'd like to, then you should be mindful of that. We should all be when it's time to retake the IDI in a year. That's part of my East Coast directness coming out, probably. Any other thoughts or questions? Tell me what you're thinking right now as we're closing.
I'm thinking about that prospect of the finite or the dead end. There's never a dead end. You just get to the finite fence post, if you will. But if you climb over it, it never ends.
Right.
So there's going to always be something to do and somewhere to go, even on the trip after our death.
Yeah.
This is going to be an interesting journey.
I just want to read a comment that we got from Lorna to make sure that we give voice to all questions or comments. No question, but she just wants to thank you, Pastor Jia, and says that she's excited to take part in this with everyone. I'm excited as well, and I just thank you all for your participation and your questions.
Yeah, yeah. I was at George Floyd Square is another one of those spaces where I don't know has anybody been to George Floyd Square? It is a sacred space. And I felt called there and I started just showing up. I had no agenda. I just started showing up and being present. And it was interesting being there and building community. I started hearing about needs. I started hearing about things that people needed. It became more about a community versus about needing to provide a glove or find a solution. I found that what people were really craving was the relationship. And so when it came time to needing to build greenhouses, interestingly, I have no experience in building I don't even know how to build a greenhouse. But I was one of the, but yet they sent me an invitation and asked me to come, which I thought was so meaningful. That it speaks to that this is the thing, that this is the rub here, is what's important for us in ministry, is to begin to build the relationships so that it's not just about finding a solution. It's about building community. And that's a different spin than what we generally have in ministry. What were you saying? Oh, you muted. Okay. One more.
Okay. Me, Pastor Gia?
Yep.
What I wanted to say is the human heart is hungry. We're hungry for a real, deeper sense of community. God is opening up our eyes, our spiritual eyes now, and we realize that we really need each other and that everybody is so important. And we're focusing on what we have in common as opposed to what we don't. And as I say to Pastor Lawrence all the time, God has some very special things that Minnesota has, the Twin Cities has been called to do. And I see this as a call for us answering God's call to do this. And I see that we're doing it in faith and in love. And I think God is going to use us to lead the way to get this work done, Pastor Gia. So I'm standing in agreement with you.
Amen. I'm excited. You know, I will say this in closing. I don't know about you. Sometimes I tell people I'm a recovering perfectionist. You know, I want to be in control. I want to know what's happening, how it's going to happen, how it's going to end out on the other side. And sometimes I want to know all those things before I invest. I want to know how it's going to go. This is a faith journey. Faith journey means that we are moving in faith and trusting that the Spirit is going to go before us and is going to create some really incredible opportunities for learning and relationship. And so we may not know what next week is going to look like. We may not know what next month or the next 6 months are going to look like. We're entering in faith and trusting that the Spirit is going to do the work. So I won't be able to. It's kind of like the IDI. I'm intentionally not telling you what's on that assessment because I want you to go in as your full self and just show up. And we've got to have a starting point. The same thing comes with this action. You know, a journey. We have an idea of where we're going, but there's so many twists and turns. What I'm excited about is what's going to be on the other side, the relationships which we're going to learn, that we're going to cultivate, the learning that's going to happen, the new and different ways we're going to learn to advocate for each other, the new definitions of these buzzwords. These are things that I'm hopeful for. So I just want to say to you, especially this Westernized tradition has this, we have this impulse to want to control everything. We have this impulse to want to be able to determine how things are going to end up before we invest. But the need is now, and the need is great. And we need to give the keys to the Spirit and let her lead. And that's what we'll be doing for this journey. Any other questions at all? All right. Well, I think I just want to, before passing this over to Pastor Lawrence, thank you again for taking an hour and 9 minutes out of your day today on Saturday. I'll be sending you those login codes in the next few days, so look for those. And if you'd like to schedule an individual IDI feedback session, you can reply to that email so that we can schedule that and get that taken care of. Otherwise, the next time you'll see me will be at 2:00 on November 7th.
Thank you so much, Pastor Gia. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And thank you all so much for your time today. I love each and every single one of you so, so much. I pray that the day is what you need it to be. I'll be sending a follow-up email with this video as well as the corrected time to the entire group so that everyone who was not able to be here today receives the same information. Huge thanks to everyone here today. And thank you again, Pastor Gia. Peace and blessings to you all. And feel free to send us questions, comments along the way.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.